We didn't recognize this one by shouting or a scene. It was quieter than that. A courthouse email stamped early morning, a clean subject line, a familiar family name used like a weapon. Meredith Sloan is a federal prosecutor who spent years building cases with paper trails and patience. What hit her this time wasn't the lawsuit by itself. It was the feeling of being reduced to a story she didn't write, told by the two people who left first. What happened next moved in her own words. My phone buzzed while I was still at the kitchen counter, one hand on my coffee, the other scrolling without thinking. Alexandra Moore's name flashed across the screen. I answered with my shoulder pressed to the fridge. "Tell me it's not what I think." "It's what you think," Alexandra replied, voice flat in that way that meant she'd already read every line twice. "They filed this morning. Circuit Court. Alexandria." I stared at the edge of my mug like it had done something wrong. They actually did it. They did. And they didn't just challenge the will. They named you personally. I swallowed. On what grounds? Undue influence, capacity, isolation, the usual menu. A pause. Paper shifting. Meredith. They're not treating this like a legal argument. They're treating it like a public story. I don't do public stories. I know. That's why it's working. I set the mug down. My hand didn't shake, but my wrist felt tight, like I was holding something back on purpose. Send it. It's already in your inbox. I opened the email. The first page had my name in the caption, clean and black, like I was a company being sued. Patricia Sloan Whitmore and Daniel Whitmore. Plaintiffs, Meredith Sloan, defendant. I read the first paragraph, then the second, then had to stop. The words were formal, but the message underneath was familiar. You owe us. You belong to us. You don't get to be your own person. Alexandra's voice came through again. Say something. I'm here. Good. Listen. They're going to lean on blood. They're going to lean on reputation. They're going to stand outside that courthouse and make it look like you stole a mother's last chance. I didn't steal anything. I know. The court will care about records. The crowd will care about tears. I closed my eyes for a second, not to calm down, to make space. When is the first hearing? 2 weeks? And Meredith. There's another piece. My stomach went cold. What? My office got a call from your agency's ethics council. They're opening a review because your name is in the papers now. I held the phone tighter. A review for what? For optics, Alexandra said. For noise. For the possibility that you prosecuted people for elder fraud while you were allegedly doing the same thing at home. I let out one short breath. They're trying to take my job. They're trying to take your voice. A knock hit my front door, sharp and impatient. I wasn't expecting anyone. I didn't move. The knock came again, louder, like whoever it was assumed they belonged there. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This has gone far enough. You need to do the right thing. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. We heard how the pressure showed up first, not in court, not in public, at home, in the middle of an ordinary morning, when silence is supposed to be safe. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door anyway. If you want to keep this kind of story close, subscribing helps it find its people. I pulled the door open. Patricia stood in the hallway like she'd rehearsed the posture. Perfect coat, perfect hair, a face set to look wounded without looking messy. Meredith, she said, like my name was something she still owned. We need to talk. I kept my hand on the doorframe. You filed a lawsuit. Her mouth tightened, then softened on purpose. We did what we had to do. Your grandfather wasn't himself. You weren't there. Daniel was a step behind her, shoulders squared, eyes darting past me into my apartment like he was taking inventory. Don't start, he muttered. We're trying to handle this like adults. I stared at him. Adults don't sue their kid and show up at her door the same morning. Patricia stepped closer, lowering her voice the way she used to when she wanted something. You can end this quickly. You can sign a statement, a simple one. Say you're willing to be fair. I'm not signing anything." Her expression flickered. Just a flash. Something sharp under the polish. Daniel's jaw worked like he was chewing anger into something presentable. "You think you're untouchable because you wear a badge?" "I think I'm untouchable because the truth doesn't change depending on who's crying," I said, and felt my own heart thud once. Hard, like it agreed. Patricia held my gaze. "Then we'll let the court decide what kind of daughter you are." Security took my phone and handed it back like it mattered less once it was out of my pocket. The courtroom smelled faintly of paper and something citrusy someone had sprayed too close to the benches. I slid into my seat beside Alexandra and lined my notepad with the edge of the table. Old habit. Square things before they tilt. She leaned in just enough for me to hear. No reacting. Let him talk. I nodded once. Across the aisle, my mother sat perfectly still, hands folded, eyes forward. My father kept adjusting his tie, not looking at anyone long enough to settle. Stephen Hale stood when the clerk finished the formalities. He didn't rush. He liked the pause. He let it stretch until the room leaned toward him. "Your Honor," he began, voice warm, almost gentle. "This case is about a mother who was pushed aside, not by time, not by distance, but by design." He paced a few steps, stopped where the light caught his face. Patricia Whitmore gave birth to her only child and watched. Over the years, as access narrowed, visits complicated, phone calls unanswered, decisions made without her, my jaw tightened. Alexandra tapped my pen with one finger, a reminder. Hale kept going. He talked about concern, about confusion, about an elderly man who had once been brilliant but became, in his words, vulnerable. He never said my name until he had to. When he did, it landed heavier than the rest. The defendant positioned herself as protector. He said, "But protection, unchecked, can become control." My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue she'd brought folded small, like she knew she'd need it. The sound of it opening felt louder than it should have. Hale finished with a nod toward the bench. We asked the court to look past titles and see what was taken. Alexandra didn't stand right away. She wrote one last note, capped her pen, then rose. Her voice was quieter than his had been. It carried anyway. "This case is not about what looks right," she said. "It's about what can be proven." She didn't gesture toward me. She didn't look at my parents. The will was executed years before any alleged decline. Medical records exist. Financial records exist. Phone logs exist. And they tell a story that doesn't change depending on who repeats it. She paused, just long enough to let the words settle. "You'll hear about distance. You'll hear about hurt. What you will not hear is evidence of coercion." The judge nodded once, expression unreadable. "We'll proceed." When Alexandra sat, she leaned close again. "They're going to sell emotion. We're going to sell consistency." I exhaled slowly, felt my shoulders drop a fraction. Across the room, my father finally looked at me. His mouth opened, then closed, like he'd forgotten what he'd planned to say. I looked back at my notes. Clean page. Plenty of room. The hallway outside the courtroom was too bright for how quiet it felt. People stood in loose clusters, talking low, like the walls might remember. Alexandra handed me a bottle of water from her bag. The cap was already loosened. "Drink," she said. "You're holding your breath." I took a few sips. The water tasted like plastic. Still helped. At the far end of the hall, my mother was speaking with Stephen Hale. Her hands moved in small, careful arcs, the way she used to gesture at charity luncheons. My father hovered just behind her shoulder, nodding when she paused, like punctuation. Alexandra followed my gaze. "They're good at this part. I know." She tilted her head. "Do you know how good?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. I hadn't expected it to work past security. But there it was. Unknown number again. I didn't open it. Alexandra noticed. Media or friends of friends pretending to be concerned. She didn't smile. Your office called while you were inside. I stiffened. Already they're calling it a preliminary review. No findings, no timeline. She let that hang. It's not about guilt. It's about distance. They want to see how far this splashes. I leaned back against the wall. The paint felt cool through my jacket. They think I'll settle. They think you'll want it quiet. Across the hall. My mother laughed softly at something Hale said. It wasn't loud enough to hear the words. The sound landed anyway. Alexandra continued. They're framing this as reconciliation. If you compromise, they'll call you gracious. If you don't, they'll call you cruel. I looked down at the floor tiles, counted the thin cracks between them. If I compromise, I'm saying the story they're telling is true, or at least possible, she added. A court officer stepped past us, shoes squeaking faintly. 10 minutes, he called out, not stopping. We stayed where we were. Alexandra shifted her weight. There's an offer coming. I can feel it. Let me guess. Split things. Joint statement. Family unity. She gave a small nod. Something like that. I can't. I know. I just need to hear you say it before they do. I thought about the email I'd woken up to. My name typed cleanly at the top. Defendant. Not granddaughter. Not caretaker. Defendant. I didn't build my life on shortcuts. I said, I'm not starting now. Alexandra watched me for a moment. That choice costs you. I'm aware. At the other end of the hall, my father broke away and started toward us. His steps slowed as he got closer, like he hadn't decided how this was supposed to go. Meredith, he said, stopping a few feet away. He smelled faintly of aftershave, same brand he'd worn for years. We don't have to do this the hard way. Alexandra straightened, just enough to mark the line. He ignored her. Your mother's been under a lot of stress. I imagine she has. She didn't want it to come to this. She signed the complaint. His mouth tightened. You're being stubborn. I met his eyes. I'm being accurate. He exhaled sharply, then lowered his voice. People are watching. Your job. Your reputation. I know, and you're willing to risk that. I'm willing to not lie. He shook his head once, like I'd disappointed him in a familiar way. You always make things difficult. Alexandra stepped forward then. Time, she said calmly. We're going back in. The court officer called again. Louder this time. My father hesitated, then turned away without another word. As we walked back toward the doors, Alexandra glanced at me. You're steady. I don't feel steady. You don't have to. You just have to stay. We stepped inside. They called the bank records witness after lunch. A man in a gray suit walked to the stand carrying a thin folder like it weighed more than it should. He set it down carefully, squared it with the edge of the lectern, and waited. Alexandra stood when the clerk finished swearing him in. You're the custodian of records for the Sloan Family Trust. Yes, that trust has been active for how long? 18 years. My mother shifted in her seat. Not much. Just enough to notice. Alexandra continued. During that time, regular distributions were made to the plaintiffs. That's correct. Monthly. Yes. In the amount of $2,800. He checked the page in front of him. Yes. Alexandra let a short silence pass, and those payments continued without interruption, until this lawsuit was filed. Another pause. My father's jaw tightened. Alexandra nodded once. For the record. What was the total amount distributed over those 18 years? Approximately $612,000. The numbers hung in the air, neat and unarguable. Stephen Hale stood. Objection. Relevance. The judge looked down at the bench. Overruled. Continue. Alexandra turned back to the witness. Were these distributions gifts? No. They were structured support payments under the terms of the trust, and those terms included conditions. Yes, specifically, that the beneficiaries would not interfere with estate planning decisions. That's correct. I felt my chest tighten, just a little. Alexandra hadn't looked at me once. She didn't need to. When the witness stepped down, she called the next one without ceremony. A woman from a travel agency. Hair pulled back, reading glasses on a chain. You handle bookings for the Whitmores. Yes. Alexandra slid a document across. Does this itinerary look familiar? The woman leaned forward. Yes. Mediterranean cruise. Booked several years ago. During the same period, the plaintiffs claimed they were attempting frequent visits. Stephen Hale rose again. Voice sharper this time. Objection. Sustained as to form. The judge said, rephrase. Alexandra didn't miss a beat. During the weeks listed here, were the plaintiffs traveling? Yes. They were out of the country. My mother stared straight ahead. The tissue in her hand stayed folded. By the time Alexandra finished, the table in front of us was stacked with paper, clean, labeled, boring in the way that matters. We took a short break. I stood near the back wall, hands clasped behind me, watching people file out. A woman I didn't recognize glanced at me, then looked away quickly, like she'd been caught staring. We noticed how the room changed when the story stopped being emotional and started being organized. Alexandra came back to my side. They'll pivot now. To what? To intention, feelings, hurt. I nodded, because the numbers don't argue. She gave a thin smile. Exactly. We went back in before anyone called us. Alexandra carried the box herself. Plain cardboard. No markings. She set it on the table like it might tip if she moved too fast. The clerk approached, checked the label, then nodded. Small motions. Careful ones. Defense moves to admit contemporaneous journals kept by Ruth Sloan. Alexandra said. Voice even. For state of mind. Stephen Hale stood halfway out of his chair. Objection. The judge looked at the box, then at Hale. On what basis? Hearsay. Alexandra didn't rush. Not for the truth of each entry. To establish routine, presence, and expectation. The context in which decisions were made. A pause. Paper shuffled at the bench. Admitted for limited purpose. The judge said, proceed. Alexandra opened the box and lifted the top journal. No drama. Just a book that had been handled a lot. The cover bent at the corners. The pages inside weren't yellowed so much as softened, like they'd been turned with care. She didn't read the entries herself. She called the witness who'd cataloged them, a woman with calm hands and a voice that didn't wobble when the room got quiet. Are these journals kept regularly? Yes. How often? Most days. Sometimes every day for weeks. Alexandra nodded. Please read the entry dated March 15th. The woman adjusted her glasses. Patricia called. Said they might come by Sunday. I made chicken anyway. Set the extra place. No one came. My throat tightened. I pressed my tongue to the back of my teeth and kept still. April 2nd. Alan waited until 8. Meredith stayed. We wrapped leftovers. Across the aisle, my mother's posture stiffened. She stared at the seal on the wall like it might offer instructions. Alexandra let the entries come in pairs. Not the worst ones. Not the ones about holidays or missed birthdays. Just the normal days. The ones that repeated. June 10th. Phone rang once. No message. Meredith brought bread. September 21st. School called. Meredith answered. Alan was proud. The witness stopped when her voice caught. She took a breath and went on. I watched my father's hands. He kept folding them together, then pulling them apart, like he couldn't find a comfortable position. He didn't look at the journals. He didn't look at me. Alexandra closed the book and set it down. No further questions. Hale crossed. He tried to make it about feelings, about misunderstandings, about notes written in frustration. The witness answered carefully, never adding more than she was asked. The journals stayed quiet. They didn't argue. They didn't need to. During the brief recess, Alexandra leaned toward me. "You're doing fine." I nodded. My chest felt full, like there wasn't room for anything else. We noticed how the room held the silence after those entries. Not heavy, just settled. When we returned, Alexandra placed the journals back in the box and slid it under the table, out of sight, still present. I took a sip of water and tasted nothing. My mother finally looked at me then. Her eyes flicked to the space beside me, the empty chair where my grandfather used to sit during hearings when he wanted to listen and not be seen. She opened her mouth, closed it, then looked away. Alexandra stood again. Next witness. The clerk called the name, and the room moved forward, carrying the weight of what had already been said. Stephen Hale called his witness without looking at me. Dr. James Barrett. A man in a navy suit stood from the second row and walked to the stand. He adjusted his glasses once, then again, like the habit came before the thought. When he sat, he placed his hands flat on the rail, fingers spread as if anchoring himself. Alexandra rose. She didn't approach right away. She let the clerk finish. She waited until the room settled. "Dr. Barrett," she began, voice level. "You examined Alan Sloan." "Yes." "How many times?" "Twice." She took a step closer. "On what dates?" He glanced down at his notes. "March 12th and April 3rd. Those were the only visits." "Yes." Alexandra nodded. "You're not his primary physician." "No." "You didn't see him before March 12th." "No." "You didn't see him after April 3rd." "That's correct." She turned a page on her pad. The sound was soft, deliberate. "During those visits, did you administer any standardized cognitive assessments?" "I conducted clinical observations." "Doctor, that's not what I asked." He shifted in his seat. "No formal testing." Across the aisle, my mother leaned forward, hands clasped tight. Alexandra continued. "You prescribed a sedative on the second visit?" "Yes." "At whose suggestion?" There was a pause. Too long. "Answer the question." The judge said. Barrett cleared his throat. Patricia Whitmore expressed concern about anxiety. Alexandra didn't react. "Did Alan Sloan report anxiety to you?" "No." "Did his primary physician?" "I don't know." She slid a document onto the rail. "These are records from his primary physician, dated 1 week after your second visit. Please read the highlighted line." Barrett leaned in, his voice dipped. "Patient reports no anxiety symptoms. Cognitive function intact." Alexandra waited until he finished. "Thank you." She moved closer now. Just a step. "Doctor, you listed yourself in discovery as an expert witness." "Yes." "Your practice opened how long before these visits?" "About 8 months." "And your referral for Alan Sloan came from—" He hesitated. "Doctor." "A colleague." "Name?" "Thomas Reynolds." Alexandra nodded once. "And Dr. Reynolds is related to Patricia Whitmore." Hale was on his feet. "Objection. Overruled." The judge said, "The witness will answer." Barrett's shoulders dropped a fraction. "He's her cousin." The room didn't react right away. It didn't need to. Alexandra took a breath. "You saw Alan Sloan twice. You conducted no formal testing. You prescribed medication he did not request, based on concern raised by a family member with a financial interest in this case." She let that sit. "And you're asking this court to rely on your impression over years of medical records." Barrett opened his mouth, then closed it. No further questions. Hale tried to recover ground on redirect. He asked about demeanor, about confusion, about age. Barrett answered, but the confidence was gone. His hands kept finding his glasses, then dropping back to the rail. When he stepped down, Alexandra returned to her seat without looking at me. We noticed how the air changed then. Not dramatic, just thinner, like something had been removed and nothing rushed in to replace it. The judge called for a short recess. Chairs scraped softly. People stood. Conversations started, then stopped when eyes met. Alexandra leaned in. That was as clean as it gets. I nodded. My pulse had finally slowed enough to feel. Across the room. My mother didn't look at Barrett. She didn't look at me either. She stared at the papers on the table, fingers pressing a crease into the corner, like she was trying to fold the moment smaller. The bailiff called us back. We sat and waited. They caught me near the water fountain, just outside the courtroom doors. Alexandra was a few steps behind me, talking quietly with the clerk. Patricia moved fast, the way she always had when she thought timing mattered. Meredith. I stopped, not because I had to, because I wanted this to be clean. Stephen Hale came up beside her, hands open, like he was there to keep the temperature down. My father stayed back, eyes fixed on the floor tiles. Patricia's voice was low, controlled. We don't need to keep going like this. Alexandra stepped in beside me, close enough to be felt. Any conversation goes through counsel. Hale nodded. Of course. Patricia looked past him, straight at me. This has turned into something it never should have been. I watched her mouth shape the words. Careful. Practiced. You filed the case. We filed because we were shut out. She said, because everything was decided without us. Alexandra shifted her weight. The record doesn't support that. Patricia waved a hand, dismissing the sentence like it was background noise. This is what I'm proposing. She glanced at Hale, who pulled a single page from his folder and held it out without stepping closer. We withdraw the suit. We issue a joint statement. No admissions. Just closure. Alexandra didn't take the paper. Patricia went on. Softer now. We split what's left. Fairly. You keep your career. We keep our dignity. My father finally looked up. His eyes met mine for a second, then slid away. It doesn't have to be a win or a loss. I felt my chest tighten, then settle. I'm not correcting your story by lying. Patricia's jaw flexed. You don't have to call it a lie. I do. Silence spread between us. Not dramatic, just present. Alexandra spoke then. We're continuing. Hale nodded once, already retreating. Then we'll let the court finish it. Patricia held my gaze a moment longer. Something unreadable passed through her face. She turned away without another word. We went back inside. Alexandra leaned in as we walked. You're sure? I am. She gave a small nod. All right. The doors closed behind us. We stood when the judge returned. Chairs scraped softly, then stopped. The room settled into that particular quiet that only shows up when everyone knows the talking is almost over. The judge looked down at the file in front of him, adjusted his glasses, then looked up again. His voice stayed even, procedural. No warmth, no edge. The court has reviewed the evidence and testimony presented, he said, including medical records, financial documents, and contemporaneous writings. My mother clasped her hands tighter. My father's foot tapped once, then stilled. The will executed by Alan Sloan meets the requirements of testamentary capacity. The judge continued. There is no credible evidence of undue influence. Stephen Hale's shoulders dropped a fraction. Alexandra didn't move at all. The plaintiff's claims are dismissed with prejudice. The words landed cleanly, not loud, not soft, just final. A murmur moved through the gallery, then faded when the judge raised one hand. Additionally, pursuant to the terms of the family trust, distributions to the plaintiffs are suspended as of the filing date of this action. My mother's breath caught. It was quick, almost soundless. She reached for the edge of the table like she needed it to stay upright. The judge closed the file. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down once. People stood, papers shuffled. Someone behind me whispered something I couldn't make out. Alexandra leaned toward me. It's done. I nodded, though my body lagged a beat behind the moment. Across the aisle, my parents gathered their things. My father moved first, sliding his chair back, straightening his jacket like muscle memory had taken over. My mother stayed seated a second longer. She looked at the table, then at her hands, as if checking whether they were still hers. She didn't look at me when she finally stood. Hale murmured something in her ear. She nodded once, sharp, and walked toward the exit without turning around. Alexandra and I waited until the aisle cleared. She handed me my coat. "Take a minute." "I'm okay. I know," she said. Still, we stepped into the hallway together. The noise there was different, looser. People talking again. Someone laughed too loudly. Alexandra paused near the doors. "You held the line." I exhaled. Slow this time. I did. She squeezed my arm once, brief and steady, then let go. I stood there a moment longer, listening to the courthouse breathe itself back to normal. I didn't go back to the apartment right away. I drove instead. No music on. Windows cracked just enough to let the air move. By the time I parked, the sun was already lower, light hitting the street at an angle that made everything look briefly unfinished. The house was quiet when I unlocked the door. It always was. I set my keys on the small dish by the entry, the one Ruth had picked because it didn't slide. The dining table was still where it had always been, solid, scratched in one corner, 4 chairs, even though we rarely needed all of them. I sat down anyway. Later that week, I signed the final paperwork. The house would go to a legal aid foundation focused on elder protection. No press, no announcement, just a transfer, clean and ordinary. I kept the journals. I kept the table. I kept the routine. Sunday dinners didn't stop just because the people who started them were gone. At the cemetery, I brought nothing elaborate, no flowers that needed explaining. Just myself, standing between 2 names carved into stone. I told them the case was finished, that I didn't bend, that I didn't trade what they trusted me with. I stayed. I said out loud, the word settling easier than it ever had before. The week after that, I went back to work. New files, new names, the noise of other people's lives filling the hours. It felt steadier than I expected. Lighter, maybe. Not because I'd won, because I hadn't given anything up to do it. Meredith Sloan doesn't wait for calls that don't come anymore. I don't scan rooms for people who chose absence. I know what I kept, and what I let go. And the difference between the two, some stories don't end with applause or reconciliation. They end with distance, and that distance is enough. We noticed how she didn't take victory with her when she left the courtroom. She took clarity. If this story stayed with you, staying connected helps us keep telling the ones that arrive quietly and leave their mark anyway.